Hey everybody, this is Chris with Overclockersclub. We've got a cool solid state drive today. Okay, so today we've got the MP600 Elite with heatsink. This is an older MP600. It also has a heatsink with it. I bought this several years ago and it's been in service ever since. You can see the speeds there are a little slower. We've got 4950 and 4250 read and write, and this one here is rated at 7000 and 6500 read and write, and these are both PCIe Gen4 units. But the heat sinks are there because these are actually intended to be used with PlayStations, and I do not have a PlayStation. In fact, I've never had a console, a gaming console in my entire life, and I go all the way back before the Atari 2600, so I'm still suffering the trauma of never getting the 2600 that I wanted for Christmas, but that's another story. And if we go to the Corsair website, these drives are available bare. They can be purchased without the heatsink or with the heatsink, and I'll explain why you might want to purchase one with a heatsink even if you don't have a PlayStation or don't intend to use one in a PlayStation. And what's interesting here, this is the MP700 Pro, and the speeds on it are in fact, let me just click on that and I'll show you real quick here. Since we're already here, let's see, the speeds are, here we go. Look at that. That's PCIe Gen5 territory there. But those are some impressive numbers. Anyway, that's not what we're here for. We are here today for the MP600 Elite. And while we are talking about heat sinks, you can actually purchase an aftermarket heatsink. So let's just say you have a drive and you want to add a heatsink. So Be Quiet has one, for example. This one is really just a piece of extruded aluminum and a thermal pad. And you take your drive, you set it in a little metal cradle. Of course, you peel off the thermal, or the cover on the thermal pad there, which I won't do because it's kind of sticky. Anyway, you set your drive in there, set the heatsink on top, some screws hold it together, and it ends up looking just like the one we're looking at here from Corsair. It's basically the same thing, same concept. So these are available in the aftermarket, and they actually even take it a step further. You can get some of these that have fans on them. In fact, Corsair has one we'll look at here in a little bit. But here's another one that's a little taller of an extrusion, and it actually has underneath the heat pad a couple of copper heat pipes. So this one takes it up a notch. So anyway, the reason why you might want to still purchase one with a heatsink and you're not going to use it in a PlayStation, you would use it with your motherboard. Some older motherboards do not have the integrated heatsinks built in like this one does. And this one has multiple SSD slots. There's one here, one here, one here, one here, and I think there's one over here if I remember correctly. Anyway, there's the heatsink that goes over that I have removed, which is right here. So this is where we're going to put the Corsair drive, in that spot. Now I do have PCIe Gen5 slots. However, since we're looking at a PCIe Gen4 drive, it will automatically bump down to those speeds. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and get this installed and formatted. These usually don't come formatted. And then we'll look at some of the thermal profiles at idle and under a load, and we'll look at the some of the read and write speeds. And ordinarily, let me show you here, if I had just a regular thin drive with no heatsink on it, you would just put it in the slot, push it down, and there's actually back here you can see there is a, let me take that out. There's a little quick release, so you don't have to use a screw. Lockdown back here. There's one that goes right here in this position. I had to take it out because it won't fit with the drive with the heatsink. So normally I would put the drive in there like that, this drive with no heatsink, and then you set the motherboard heatsink down on top of that. But since the drive with the heatsink is thicker because of the heatsink, I can't put the motherboard heatsink on there, so I actually have to use a screw that to focus, I have to use a more traditional screw that is just for the purpose of holding these solid state drives down. And there we go. Now we can fire it up. So the next step after the drive is powered up, or after the system is powered up, I go into disk management, and it sees that the disk is not initialized. It is disk 1. We don't want MBR, master boot record, we want GPT. So now we just go ahead and say yes. And here is the drive now. And then we right click on it, create a new volume. Yes, next. That's fine. NTFS, quick format. And there we go. We now have, oops, it closed. Little folder open and then it went away. Anyway, so there we have the drive that is now ready to go. And one thing I like to do to help reduce confusion, especially as many times as I'm moving drives in and out of my test system, I go in and right click on the drive. That said like volume D before, and then I can change the name. So I name it what the drive is, and then I go ahead and put the capacity in there. So it makes it easier to find the drive when you've got multiple drives all running at the same time. Okay, so now I will run some of the synthetic benchmarks. We'll start here with Crystal Disk, and then I'll try Atto, and I've got a couple others that I'll also try, and then we'll talk about the Corsair SSD toolbox, but let me get some numbers here from some of these benchmarks first. So Corsair has several benchmarking software packages that they use to test their products, and these are the three that seem to work for me. A couple of them just did not want to work at all. But anyway, these numbers are in alignment with what Corsair was showing that they were getting, so I'm comfortable here that these are accurate. Actually, some of these were slightly higher than the numbers that they got. And you can run these tests, you know, a dozen times, and you can get numbers that will go a little higher than the specs. You may get some numbers that go a little lower than the specs. There is some normal variation there. And each one of these packages, for example, these software packages, they all measure it a little differently. That's why you'll see some differences in the numbers between those three. And for example, these are the numbers that Corsair was showing using this particular test here, the ASSSD benchmark. The numbers they got, and these are the numbers that I got when I run the same test. Now there is a slightly different version number here. I'm using something that's slightly newer, but my numbers are actually just a little bit better than the numbers they got. But like I said, you could run these tests, you know, 10 times, and there's going to be a little bit of float there between the numbers you get each time. So like I said, sometimes they'll be a little higher, sometimes they'll be just a little lower. And the next thing I'll do is I'll put a load on the drive, we'll do some stress testing, and then we'll look at some of the temperatures. And again, the heat sink on here, this was intended for a PlayStation. You can use it on a standard PC, but the heat sink may get in the way, so really for a PC you'd want to get the unit that doesn't have the heat sink. Performance-wise, they should be the same. But as I was digging around, I came across one of my old 160 gigabyte 3.5-inch drives, spindle drive, platter drive, whatever you want to call it. These things are, of course, dinosaurs. They make them in very large capacities now for massive data storage capacity. But this was the real game changer when these came out. And I think this might be the original one that I first bought back in 2010, maybe 2011. 120 gigabytes. The capacities on these were pretty low. They were horribly expensive compared to the 3.5-inch drives for the capacity. And I think, if I remember correctly, they had reliability issues off and on with these when they first came out. But they were the real game changers as far as speed. And here's what one looks like on the inside. You can see there's a lot going on there. Of course, things are a lot different now with the NVMe or the M.2 drives. So, all right, let's get on to the thermal testing. Okay, so going over the test system again, this is a Z790 motherboard. I've got a 13900K CPU underneath the cooler there. I've got 32 gigabytes of Vengeance DDR5 RAM, and the graphics card is a 4070 Super. Now you can see the drive here, the Corsair drive, is out here in the open with the heatsink exposed. I don't have the motherboard heatsink on there because it won't fit. And to simulate air in a case, since the motherboard is all out in the open here, I've got a couple of fans that are moving air across the motherboard to help keep things cool. So what I'll do is I'll show some idle temperatures with and without the fans on, and then we'll put a load on the drive, moving data back and forth, simulating some benchmarking basically, and then we'll look at the temperatures with and without air moving across, just so you get an idea. Okay, I'm using hardware info to monitor the temperature here of the MP600, and I'm using the Atto disk benchmark to sort of do the benchmark read and write to see what it does to the temperature. We started off at 31C, and it looks like the max has been 34C. So we'll see how much that creeps up. Doesn't look like it's going to go up very much, so we'll come back here in a moment and see if there's really much difference. Okay, so we're coming up on the end of the testing, and it looks like the low was 30 degrees Celsius, and it is about 20 degrees Celsius in the room currently, and it looks like about a 6-degree swing between the lowest and the highest that we saw. Now what I'll do is disconnect these two fans, and I'll run the same test to see how much of an effect the airflow across the motherboard has on the SSD temperature. Okay, so we've cooled down to about 31 degrees Celsius. I unplugged the fans, and now we'll just let it sit for a little bit and see what that does to the idle temperature with no air moving across. And then I'll run the benchmark again, and we'll see what our maximum temperature turns out to be. Okay, so I've been sitting here at idle for a while. It has bounced around between 38 and 39C. I haven't seen it hit 40 yet. But again, this is at idle with no airflow. Of course, I just said that, and there it just bounced up to 40. No airflow across the drive. So again, this is just no surprises, but highlights the importance of having airflow moving across your motherboard, which normally you would. So now I'm going to go ahead and run this test again over here, and then we'll see what we max out at. Okay, so we are wrapping up the test. It looks like we've maxed out at about 46 degrees Celsius, and again, it's 20 degrees Celsius in the room. So if it was warm in here, like a summer day, or your computer is up there, we bounced up to 47. Your computer is in an upper level of a building where it's warmer in the summer, so your ambient is closer to 30 degrees Celsius maybe, worst case. Of course, your numbers here are going to be proportionally higher. Again, no surprise, but this does emphasize the necessity for having good airflow in your case. Okay, so we should slowly start to see this drift down now that the test is complete. And I've got one more 3D Mark storage benchmark test I'm going to do, and we'll see what that does. Okay, so I got everything cooled back down to 30 degrees Celsius. Looks like it dipped down to 29 briefly. There, it's 31. Okay, so it looks like this is going to take a few minutes to do all the preparing and get going. So I'll be back here in a few minutes. Okay, real quick, while I'm waiting on the next benchmark, I wanted to see what the operating temperature is. So it's 0C all the way up to 70C. So what I was trying to figure out is what is the throttling temperature. So it looks like it may start to throttle at around 70 degrees C, which means that if you ever got to that temperature, it would start to reduce speed to protect the drive from overheating. And like I said, that's kind of a worst case if you have a system that either the fans aren't working or your filters are clogged and you're in a really hot room. You know, a situation would be where you have no air circulating past your hard drive, your solid state drive, to keep it cool. So again, unlikely, but things you need to keep in mind. Okay, so it looks like it finally started doing the benchmark. And temperature, though, I don't see it really changing much, so maybe it's not stressing the drive all that much. At least not at this point. Okay, so it doesn't look like it's really doing anything. The temperature hasn't varied by more than a degree or two here. So I got into Task Manager. I wanted to see, okay, what are we actually stressing? And I'm looking at all of the drives, and there's really not much going on. It looks like, if anything, it's I mean 5, 10, 15% on the C drive, which we're actually looking at the D drive. That's the Corsair drive. So not much going on, so I don't think we're going to learn anything from this benchmark. Okay, so for what it's worth, the score is 3828. Looks like the average is 2202, so I would say that's probably a pretty good number, although I really don't have much to compare it to since I haven't run this 3D benchmark storage test before. So I guess we'll just hang on to that number for future tests. So the next thing I'll do, since this didn't really stress the drive here like the Atto benchmark does, I'm going to pop in the thermal camera, fire up the Atto benchmark test again, and then we'll just sort of look and see what the external temperature looks like. Okay, so we've got the thermal camera here. We'll look at the external part of the heatsink there. It looks like we're right at about 34, or a touch under 34 actually. Close to 34. Well, there we go at that end. It looks like it's a little warmer. So the controller may be at that end of the heatsink. So there's the chipset for the motherboard. Not much going on there. There's the graphics card. You can see the fan is not running. It's just sitting there at idle. I do have the two fans over here. They are on, moving air across the motherboard just like you would normally have in your case. So you can see temperature has increased as the benchmark progresses. We're only about a quarter of the way into it, so I'll come back here in a moment. Okay, so we're most of the way through the test, and I have not seen it go above 40 degrees Celsius yet. We are right on the edge. Oh, there it is, 40. But it looks like it's doing a good job, like I said, of keeping the temperature well below the throttling threshold. And there's what is happening in the task manager. You can see the test just ended. You can see how it stresses the drive. Alright, so now I will move some large files over here from one solid state drive over to the test unit here, and you can see the speeds there, and I'll move these back and forth, and then we will move them back. You can get an idea of what sort of real-world speeds you could expect when you move large chunks of data back and forth. Alright, and now we'll move the same files from another M.2 solid state on the motherboard over to this drive, and it looks like our speeds are pretty consistent. And of course these will vary depending upon your file size and what else is going on with your system. And a quick look at the specifications. This comes in two different sizes, 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte. The 1 terabyte column there is in yellow with the yellow highlighter, and the green on the right is what we have today, which is the 2 terabyte. Okay, if we look at the pricing on the Corsair website, and this is the MP600 Elite with the heatsink. Again, this is geared towards a PlayStation, although you can use it, like I said, on a regular PC. But anyway, the 2 terabyte version is $184.99. The 1 terabyte version is $94.99. Again, that is with the heatsink. And the version without the heatsink, which is just the plain old MP600, it is $84.99. Looks like they got a little discount going on for the 1 terabyte, and then the 2 terabyte is $154.99. So a little bit of a difference in pricing if you don't use the heatsink. And again, if you've got a motherboard that has the integrated heat sinks that come with it, then you really wouldn't need to use this version. Although, like I said, you can use either one. And we've got some nice slides here on the Corsair website that sort of give you really all the information you need. Now, this is, again, a Gen 4, PCIe Gen 4. You can use it on a Gen 3, it shows down here, although you will get reduced performance. So if you're going to purchase this, make sure your motherboard is capable of handling a PCIe Gen 4 SSD. But again, we've got 7,000 on the sequential read, 6,500 on the sequential write. We saw numbers that were pretty close to that. Again, your mileage will vary depending upon what kind of data you're moving and what else is going on with your system. So let's see, we've got some other stuff here. Let me go back. Here we go. Okay. See if there's anything we missed. Built-in aluminum heat spreader, comprehensive 5-year warranty. So world-class 24/7 customer support. Although I can't say that I've ever had to deal with anything customer support-wise with Corsair. This stuff just works. Okay, so my experience here with the MP600 Elite, from a performance perspective, has been just fine. It does what it's supposed to do. The heatsink there does a good job of keeping the temperatures well below any sort of thermal threshold where we have to worry about the unit starting to throttle the speed down to keep the heat from building up too much. Of course, you know, again, this system is out in the open, so I've got to have some external fans here to keep some air moving across the motherboard. But normally in your case, you're going to have air moving, or you should have air moving through your system to help keep your solid-state drive cool. Now, another thing to consider is when you've got a graphics card that is also possibly dumping heat into your case, again, that makes it even more important to make sure you've got good airflow through your case. So overall, I would give this the Overclockers Club Gold Award. This is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.